We have with us a prominent member of the ufology field, retired Command Sergeant Major Robert O'Dean. And Major, how are you? Good to have you with us.
Good evening, Mike. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And thank you for being on the program with us as we really, I guess, spin off of what Stephen Bassett had to say. You heard, I know, some of that conversation. Are you hopeful now that there may be a release of the acknowledgement by the government that they know about what you already have told us you saw in government documents, or is there still going to be an attempt to cover this up?
Mike, let me be very blunt, if I may. I listened to Steve, and I have a high regard for Stephen Bassett. I've known him for a number of years. But I'm afraid I'm a little disillusioned about the idea of having a disclosure anytime soon. I don't think it's going to happen, and I learned firsthand about a year and a half ago myself when I visited Capitol Hill for about 2 full months that it ain't about to happen in Congress. Now, the disclosure is underway, and it's happening slowly, Mike, but it's not going to be coming from our government. It really is coming from the people themselves who are educating themselves, are beginning to ask a lot of good questions. It's coming from places like France, of all places, where reports and studies that have been released recently have indicated that something big is going down. So I wish I could be as hopeful as Steve is about the fact that there's going to be a disclosure. I will agree with him on this issue. We're in for a hell of a next 4 years, I can tell you that. If you think it's been awkward and dangerous and troublesome for the last 8, 10, we ain't seen nothing yet.
Well, then give us what your prognostication might be then about that.
First of all, let me tell you this. We have been in this country in what I would call, and what Stephen mentioned, a secret war posture for a number of years. We've been spending $50 to $80 billion a year, Mike, on unbudgeted money, black budget money that is not open to oversight or accountability. And that's the kind of money that is spent by a nation that's almost on a war footing. We have militarized space 15 years ago when George W. Bush's father was vice president. We have violated all of our agreements with all of the nations on the planet when we militarized space. Literally, 15 years ago. We have military astronauts in orbit. We have military hardware in orbit. We have weapons in orbit. So the next 4 years are not going to be much of a change in that field other than we're going to have, I think, a hell of a lot more of that.
All right, well, then, given that, you both agree on that point, the militarization on the ground, the militarization in space. Is there any connection of that to UFO contact, or is it all about just dealing with terrorists and hostile nations?
Well, I think George W. Bush has a full plate here, and we're in for some real difficult times. I see that his attention is going to be directed not only to terrorism, but he's going to have to face what I call probably the biggest danger we've faced in years, and that's the Islamic Jihad. We're going to have, Mike, really, I'm afraid, in the next year or two, a holy war that the Islamic nations are probably going to declare a jihad.
Well, as you know, Iraq is now allegedly at least rebuilt its biological and chemical warfare base.
Oh, yeah. And terrorism is going to be a #1 issue here. I think that probably Stephen is correct, that we're going to see not only probably 1 or 2 nuclear explosions somewhere on the planet, we're probably going to face a real terror from bacteriological warfare.
Is that what this intensity is about, even in space, or is there some connection to ufology?
Well, I'll tell you, the military posture and the secret budget and the fact that we militarized space years ago had nothing to do with what's going on here on the planet. Mike, it's my belief, and I've spent 40 years digging into this thing, is that our government is literally scared to death about this alien matter. And they don't really know what to tell us. There's not about to be any kind of a disclosure from a governmental agency because, Mike, frankly, they don't know what to tell us. If they were to tell us what little they know, they'd have to admit how much they don't know. And what they do know is dynamite. Our government And I use that term very carefully because I want you to understand something. I think a lot of your listeners are aware, as I am, that when we talk about our government, we're not talking about what we think of as our government. You know, the legislative, the executive, the judicial. That's not the government that really exists, Mike. We have literally in this country, and I'm very disillusioned about this, but Mike, we have a government within a government. We have a secret government. And our constitutional guarantees disappeared or began to disappear in 1947 when we signed the National Security Law into effect.
Clark Clifford was involved in creating that.
I'm sorry?
Was involved in that later.
Yes. Well, 1947 was a banner year. We not only signed the National Security Act into law, we created the CIA. We created the NSA. We also signed a secret pact with the United Kingdom, and that's something else that most people have no idea about. I don't think you. Are you aware of something known as the UKUSA Pact?
No, I am not.
Well, the words, the letters simply apply to U.S., UK, USA. UKUSA. We signed a pact with the UKUSA nations, the United Kingdom nations, in 1947, which I think primarily is the organization that's sitting on top of the cover-up.
Now, Bob,
that pact, excuse me just a minute,
sure.
That pact was signed with the British, the Australians, the New Zealanders, the Canadians. And we literally, in accordance with that pact, have been keeping the lid on this thing now for well over 50 years.
Given that, what I wanted to connect it to was your visit, which I wasn't aware of, that you made for a couple of months to D.C. and talked to members of Congress. That's an extended period of time. Did you get any sense that, first of all, privately, they acknowledge the reality of this extraterrestrial contact and simply don't want to talk about it publicly, or do they just reject it out of hand?
Mike, it's a good question. Let me give you a little background here. I was fortunate enough about a year and a half ago to spend 2 full months on Capitol Hill. I'm very proud to say that my son is a career naval officer, and he's assigned to the Pentagon. And I lived with him at Arlington for a couple of months here, a little over a year and a half ago. And while I was there, I literally haunted the Hill. I didn't go in with a press conference, and I didn't go in with photographers, and I didn't go in with a big whoop-de-doo. I went in quietly and respectfully, and I visited at least 6 senatorial offices and at least 10 House offices over the course of 2 months. And I spoke to congressmen, I spoke to senators, I spoke to their senior staff members. I made my presentation low-key. I was courteous. I was aware of the political implications of the matter. And they were very kind with me. They apparently, some of them even knew who the hell I was. The fact that they, respected that I was a retired command sergeant major, and they served me coffee, and they gave me ashtrays and all those good things. But every damned office, Mike, every individual I talked to, including several of the senators, said that this issue they will not touch with a 10-foot pole.
So they wouldn't even acknowledge its veracity or non-veracity. They simply wouldn't deal with it.
They acknowledged an awareness of it, yeah. That's the thing that kind of threw me. They acknowledged an awareness of it. They also acknowledged the efforts of Stephen Schiff, that congressman from New Mexico who died here about a year ago.
Right.
They were well aware of Schiff's efforts, and they seem to be aware of the reality of the issue.
Well, you're making a rather important point here, because Dr. Stephen Greer was on this program, somebody you know, I'm sure.
I know Stephen. I respect him.
And he told us that he was at a dinner, I believe it was, at one time. The president happened to be there, Bill Clinton. And the conversation came up very briefly about whether there would be release of this kind of information. And the president kind of chuckled about it, in a sense, as I recollect Stephen Greer's description, and said that even he didn't have the background on this, that he couldn't get this information out there, that there were people beyond him. And Jimmy Carter tried to bring this out, as I recollect, during those years. So in your view, when you talk about this government behind the government, are those the power people who are keeping this from the public, even if they